I was standing in front of the television when I saw my father being dragged out of our house in handcuffs. FBI agents swarmed our property like locusts, their blue windbreakers flashing in the afternoon sun. My phone exploded with messages. Friends, relatives, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were sending me links to the breaking news. The headline made my blood run cold. Federal Judge Arthur Vance files criminal charges against his own son for multi-million-dollar charity fraud. My hands trembled as I watched my father, Ethan Vance, stumble on our front steps, his face twisted in rage and humiliation. Behind him, my Aunt Catherine was screaming at the cameras, calling my grandfather a monster, a senile old man who had lost his mind. But I knew the truth. I knew exactly what had led to this moment, and I knew my grandfather had never been more lucid in his entire life. If you want to hear how a federal judge brought down his own son to honor his dying wife and restore justice to those who suffered, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below about what you would do if you discovered a terrible family secret. This is a story about betrayal, courage, and the price of doing what's right, even when it tears your family apart. Let me take you back to where it all began 3 months earlier on the worst day of my life. The rain came down in sheets the morning we buried my grandmother, Eleanor. The church was packed with people whose lives she had touched during her 40 years as a volunteer at various charities and nursing homes. I stood between my father and grandfather, feeling the tension between them like an electrical current. They hadn't spoken directly to each other in weeks, not since Grandma had passed away in that nursing home. My father kept his eyes fixed on the casket, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. My grandfather stood perfectly still, his posture military straight despite his 78 years, his face an unreadable mask. As the service ended and people began filing out, I heard my father's voice low and venomous. "This is your fault, old man. Your obsession with your precious principles killed her. If you had just let me handle things my way, she would have gotten better care." I turned, shocked in the bitterness in his tone. My grandfather didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at my father with those steel gray eyes that had intimidated countless lawyers and criminals during his decades on the federal bench. Then, in a voice that carried despite the sound of rain on the roof, he said, "Some debts can't be paid with coffins, Ethan. They have to be paid in court." Before I could process what that meant, my father lunged forward. His hands grabbed my grandfather's collar, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to strike him. "You sanctimonious bastard," my father shouted. "You think you're so much better than everyone else. You think your justice is the only thing that matters." Several people rushed forward to separate them. My Uncle Richard and 2 of my father's colleagues from his investment firm pulled him back. My grandfather calmly straightened his tie and collar, never breaking eye contact with his son. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Through the church doors, I could see a black sedan, waiting engine running. A man in an expensive suit held an umbrella ready. My grandfather didn't look back as he got into the car and disappeared into the gray afternoon. I stood there, rainwater mixing with my tears, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath me. My father was breathing hard, his face red with rage, and something else I couldn't identify. Fear, maybe, or guilt. My Aunt Catherine appeared at his elbow, whispering urgently in his ear. She shot me a look that made my skin crawl, then guided my father toward his own car. I was left standing in the parking lot, soaked and confused, while my grandmother's casket was loaded into the hearse. The days that followed were chaos. My father tried calling my grandfather repeatedly, but the calls went unanswered. He paced our house like a caged animal, drinking more than usual. His temper short with everyone. My mother tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, but even she seemed frightened by whatever was unfolding. I kept thinking about my grandfather's words at the funeral. What debts? What court? Aunt Catherine became a constant presence in our home during those days. She was my father's older sister, a woman who had always made me uncomfortable with her artificial sweetness and the calculating look in her eyes. She kept telling us that my grandfather had finally lost his mind, that grief over losing Grandma had pushed him over the edge into senility. "He doesn't know what he's saying anymore," she insisted, patting my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers. "Your poor grandfather is confused. We need to protect him from himself." But I remembered my grandmother's last words to me 3 days before she died. I had been sitting by her bedside in that nursing home, holding her frail hand. She had squeezed my fingers with surprising strength and whispered, "Clara, baby, your father has chosen the wrong path, and your grandfather has been carrying a terrible burden trying to protect us all. When this is over, remember that real strength isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right even when it costs you everything. I hadn't understood then, but I was beginning to. 5 days after the funeral, I was cleaning out my grandmother's things from the guest room, where she had stayed during her last visit to our house months before she got too sick. At the back of her closet, I found an old music box, the one that had played Debussy when I was a little girl. I opened it expecting to see the tiny ballerina that used to spin inside. Instead, I found a playing card, the Ace of Spades, Death and New Beginnings. I picked it up with trembling fingers. On the back, written in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, was an address I didn't recognize and 4 words, "Justice doesn't wait, Clara." I heard footsteps behind me and quickly closed my hand around the card. My father stood in the doorway, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Just some old photos," I lied, sliding the card into my pocket. "Nothing important." He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed my wrist. "Show me." "Dad, you're hurting me." I tried to pull away, shocked by his behavior. He had never been physically aggressive with me before. "Ethan," my mother appeared behind him. "What are you doing? Let her go." He released me, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm just stressed. Your grandfather has everyone on edge." He left the room quickly, leaving my mother and me staring at each other. That night, I looked up the address on the card. It was a private bank in downtown Philadelphia, the kind that catered to wealthy clients who valued discretion. I couldn't sleep, running through scenarios in my mind. What had my grandmother wanted me to find? And why was my father so paranoid about what my grandfather might have left behind? The next morning, I told my parents I was going to visit a friend from college. Instead, I drove to that bank. My heart pounded as I approached the front desk and gave the address from the card. The woman behind the counter looked at me carefully, then asked for identification and a password. Password, I hadn't thought of that. I stood there frozen until a memory surfaced. When I was 7, my grandparents had given me a puppy, a golden retriever I had named Sunshine. When the dog died 2 years later, I had been heartbroken. My grandfather had held me while I cried and told me that love never really dies, it just changes form. "Sunshine," I whispered. The woman nodded and led me to a private room. She returned with a safety deposit box and left me alone. Inside was a USB drive and a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my grandfather's precise handwriting. The envelope was thick and my hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was 3 pages long. "My dearest Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have either completed what I set out to do, or I am gone, and you must finish it for me. You are reading this because your grandmother and I always knew you had the strength and moral clarity that your father lacks. What I am about to tell you will break your heart, but you deserve to know the truth." The letter went on to explain everything. My father had been embezzling money from the Golden Years Foundation, a charity organization dedicated to providing care for elderly people in nursing homes. He had been the chief financial officer of the foundation for 6 years, and during that time he had systematically stolen nearly $4 million. The money had been siphoned off through fake vendors' inflated expense reports and direct transfers to accounts he controlled. He had used the money to maintain his lifestyle, to invest in risky business ventures, and to pay off gambling debts I never knew he had. My grandfather had discovered the theft 2 years ago, quite by accident, when an old colleague had mentioned irregularities in the foundation's finances during a chance meeting. My grandfather had started investigating quietly, using his connections in the legal community. What he found horrified him. The nursing home where my grandmother eventually spent her last days had been directly impacted by my father's theft. Funds that should have gone to patient care, to hiring adequate staff, to maintaining equipment and facilities, had vanished into my father's pockets. "Your grandmother begged me not to turn him in," the letter continued. "She believed in redemption. She thought if I confronted Ethan privately, gave him a chance to make things right, he would see the error of his ways. So I did. I sat down with your father 18 months ago and laid out everything I knew. I gave him 6 months to return the money and turn himself in voluntarily. I told him I would support him through the legal process if he showed remorse and tried to make amends." My vision blurred with tears as I read what came next. Your father's response was to deny everything. Then when I showed him the evidence, he laughed in my face. He said I was a fool, that everyone cuts corners, that the nursing home residents were going to die anyway, so what did it matter if he took money that would have been wasted? He said I had wasted my life being a Boy Scout and that he was smarter than I ever was. Then he told me that if I tried to expose him, he would make sure your grandmother suffered. He said he controlled which nursing home she went to, and he would make sure she ended up somewhere terrible if I didn't keep my mouth shut. I had to stop reading. Bile rose in my throat. My father had threatened his own dying mother. I am ashamed to say I hesitated. My grandfather's letter admitted, "Your grandmother's health was declining rapidly, and I couldn't bear the thought of her final days being worse than they had to be. So I waited. But the stress and guilt ate at your grandmother. She knew what Ethan had done. She knew I was protecting her by staying silent. And the weight of that knowledge made her sicker. The doctor said her condition deteriorated faster than expected. I believe in my heart that the anguish of knowing her son was a thief and a liar killed her as surely as any disease." The letter concluded with instructions. The USB drive contained all the evidence my grandfather had meticulously gathered over 2 years. Bank statements, emails, recorded phone calls, testimony from a whistleblower at the Foundation Forensic Accounting reports. Everything needed to convict my father beyond any reasonable doubt. My grandfather had also included evidence of my Aunt Catherine's involvement. She had helped my father launder some of the money through her real estate business, taking a cut for herself. "I have already filed the criminal complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Office," my grandfather wrote. "By the time you read this, the wheels of justice will be in motion. I am telling you this not to burden you, but to prepare you. Your father will try to paint me as vindictive, cruel, senile. Your Aunt Catherine will try to manipulate you. Do not let them. The evidence speaks for itself. I have also arranged for Dominic Rossi, the best criminal attorney I know, to handle everything. Trust him. And Clara, remember this. You are my hope. You are proof that this family can produce people of integrity and compassion. Your grandmother and I always believed you would carry forward the best of our legacy, not the worst of your father's. I love you. Be brave." I sat in that bank vault for nearly an hour, reading the letter over and over, then examining the contents of the USB drive on the laptop I had brought. The evidence was overwhelming. Spreadsheets showing the flow of money, email chains where my father discussed the scheme with Catherine, a recording of my father bragging to a friend about how easy it was to steal from a bunch of bleeding hearts who don't know the first thing about money management, photos of bank statements, testimony from Ellen Ramirez, the foundation's former bookkeeper, who had been fired when she started asking questions about discrepancies. When I finally left the bank, the world looked different. The sunny afternoon seemed obscene. How could the weather be beautiful when my entire family had been built on lies? I drove home in a daze. I needed time to think, to process what I had learned. But when I pulled into our driveway, I saw my father's car and my Aunt Catherine's Mercedes both parked haphazardly near the garage. Through the window, I could see them in the living room talking intensely. I entered through the kitchen door as quietly as possible. Their voices carried from the living room. "He has nothing," my father was saying. "Nothing that would hold up in court. The old bastard is bluffing." "Are you sure?" Catherine's voice was tight with worry. "Ethan, if he really has been collecting evidence all this time, then we destroy it. The girl might know where he's keeping everything. She was always his favorite. We need to search her room, her car, everything." My blood ran cold. I backed toward the door, but my mother appeared from the hallway. She looked at me, then at the USB drive I was still clutching in my hand. Her eyes widened. Before I could move, my father emerged from the living room. His gaze locked onto the USB drive. "What is that, Clara?" "Nothing, just some files for school." He crossed the room and yanked it from my hand. "Don't lie to me. Where did you get this?" "Give it back." I lunged for it, but Catherine grabbed my arm. "Let her go," my mother shouted. "All of you stop this right now." My father held the USB drive up to the light as if he could see through it. "This is from him, isn't it? From my father. What else did he give you?" I thought fast. "If you destroy that, the backup copy gets sent to the FBI tomorrow morning." Grandfather set up a dead man's switch. "If I don't enter a code every 24 hours, everything goes to the authorities automatically." It was a complete lie, but I said it with as much conviction as I could muster. My father's face went pale. Catherine released my arm. They looked at each other, clearly weighing whether I was telling the truth. "You're bluffing," my father finally said, but his voice lacked certainty. "Try me," I shot back. "Destroy that drive and find out what happens." The standoff lasted several long seconds. Then my father slowly handed me back the USB drive. "Fine, keep it, but you're going to listen to me very carefully, Clara. Your grandfather is trying to destroy this family. Everything we have, everything we've built, he wants to tear it down because he's a bitter old man who can't accept that his son surpassed him. Surpassed him by stealing from dying people. The words burst out before I could stop them. I've seen the evidence, Dad. I know what you did. His face went red then white. You don't understand business. You don't understand the real world. I understand right from wrong. Grandma taught me that, and she died knowing what you are. He raised his hand, and for a horrible moment I thought he would hit me. My mother stepped between us. Enough. Everyone calm down. We need to think about this rationally. But there was no more time for rational thinking. That very afternoon, while we were still arguing in our living room, my grandfather's attorney, Dominic Rossi, held a press conference. I watched it on my phone. My family gathered around me in shocked silence. Rossi stood before a podium crowded with microphones. Behind him was a blown-up photo of my grandmother in her volunteer uniform at the Golden Years Foundation. Today, retired federal judge Arthur Vance has filed criminal charges against his son, Ethan James Vance, for embezzlement, wire fraud, and theft of charitable funds totaling nearly $4 million. This is not a decision Judge Vance made lightly. In fact, he delayed filing these charges in the hope that his son would come forward voluntarily and show remorse. That did not happen. Instead, Ethan Vance continued his criminal activity and even threatened his own dying mother to keep his father silent. The reporters erupted with questions. Rossi held up his hand. Judge Vance wants the public to know that this prosecution is not about vengeance. It is about justice for the hundreds of elderly individuals who suffered because money that should have provided for their care was stolen. Behind me, you see Eleanor Vance, the judge's late wife. She spent 40 years of her life serving others. She died in a nursing home that was underfunded and understaffed because of her own son's greed. Judge Vance has said that he failed his wife by staying silent for too long, and he will not fail the other victims of this crime. Another man stepped forward to the podium. He was elderly, probably in his 80s, with white hair and a deeply lined face. My name is James Henderson, he said, his voice shaking slightly. My wife, Margaret, was a resident at Meadowbrook Senior Care, one of the facilities funded by the Golden Years Foundation. She died last year, 3 months after Eleanor Vance. The home was always short-staffed. They didn't have enough nurses, enough equipment, enough basic supplies. My Margaret developed bed sores because there weren't enough people to help turn the patients regularly. She got pneumonia because the facility couldn't afford to maintain proper ventilation. When I found out that money meant for her care had been stolen so Ethan Vance could live in a mansion and drive fancy cars, I thought I would lose my mind with anger. He paused, wiping his eyes. But Judge Vance called me. He called me personally and told me he was making this right. He told me he knows it won't bring Margaret back, but he's going to make sure no one else suffers like she did. That man lost his wife too, and he's still fighting for justice for my wife. That's courage. That's integrity. And I'm here to support him 100%. The press conference continued, but I couldn't watch anymore. Around me, my family was in complete meltdown. My father was on the phone frantically calling his lawyer. Catherine was pacing her face, a mask of fury. My mother sat on the couch crying quietly. An hour later, FBI agents arrived with a warrant. They arrested my father in our driveway with news cameras rolling and neighbors standing on their lawns watching. The agents were polite but firm as they handcuffed him and read him his rights. Catherine tried to spin the situation for the cameras, screaming about prosecutorial overreach and family vendettas, but her voice was drowned out by the agent's instructions and the click of handcuffs. I watched from the front window as they put my father in the back of an unmarked car. He looked back at the house, his eyes finding mine through the window. I don't know what he saw in my face, but whatever it was made him look away first. The next few days were a media circus. Our house was under siege by reporters. My father made bail, but the conditions were strict. He couldn't leave the state, couldn't access any of his financial accounts, and had to surrender his passport. Catherine was arrested 2 days later when Rossi released the evidence of her involvement in the money laundering scheme. She was less composed than my father, screaming and cursing at the agents as they took her away. My mother filed for divorce within a week. She told me she had suspected something was wrong for years, but had convinced herself she was being paranoid. "I'm so sorry, Clara," she said, holding me while we both cried. "I should have protected you from all of this. I should have asked more questions. I spent hours going through all the evidence on that USB drive, trying to understand how my father had become this person. Or maybe he had always been this person, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. I found emails from years ago where he complained about my grandfather's holier-than-thou attitude and his pathetic devotion to a system that doesn't reward honest people. I found texts to Catherine where he joked about the suckers who donated to the foundation and how they deserved to have their money stolen if they were stupid enough to trust a charity. But the worst part was finding emails he had sent during my grandmother's illness. In one, he wrote to Catherine, "The old bat finally got sick enough that they had to put her in a home. Silver lining, maybe she'll die soon, and the judge will be too grief-stricken to cause trouble. We just need to ride this out a few more months." I threw up after reading that. My own father had been hoping for his mother's death because it was convenient for him. 3 weeks after my father's arrest, I got a call from Dominic Rossi. My grandfather was in the hospital. He had suffered a heart attack and was asking for me. I drove to the hospital in a panic, running through the corridors until I found his room. He looked so small in that hospital bed hooked up to monitors and IVs. But when he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Clara, my girl, come here." I sat beside him and took his hand. His grip was weak, but warm. "Did you get my letter?" he asked. "Yes, Grandpa, I got everything." "And are you angry with me?" I had to think about that. Was I angry? Yes and no. I was angry at the situation at my father, at the choices that had led us all to this point. But angry at my grandfather? "No," I said finally. "You did what you had to do. You did the right thing." He smiled and I saw tears in his eyes. "Your grandmother would be proud of you. She always said you were the best of all of us." We talked for a while. He told me stories about my grandmother, about their long marriage, about the cases he had judged during his career. Then his expression grew serious. "Clara, I need to tell you something. There's one more piece to this puzzle. Your Aunt Catherine tried to destroy evidence when she realized I was investigating. She's smarter than your father, more careful, but she made one mistake. I recorded a conversation with her 6 months ago where she admitted everything. I've given that recording to Rossi, but I haven't released it yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Why wait?" I asked. "Because once that recording becomes public, there will be no way back. Catherine will go to prison for a long time. Your family will be completely fractured. I know she's terrible, but she's still your aunt, your grandmother's sister-in-law. I wanted you to have a choice in this." I thought about Catherine's fake sweetness, her manipulation, her greed. I thought about all the people who had suffered because of her and my father's crimes. "Release it," I said firmly. "Let everyone know the truth." He squeezed my hand. "That's my girl. You have your grandmother's strength. Clara, listen to me. The legacy of a family isn't money or status. It's integrity. It's standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. Your father forgot that, but you haven't. Promise me you'll remember." "I promise, Grandpa." He closed his eyes, looking peaceful. "Good, that's good. Now I can rest." "Don't talk like that," I said, fear gripping my heart. "You're going to be fine. The doctors said." "The doctors are optimists. I'm a realist. Clara, I'm tired. I've fought the good fight. I've exposed the truth. Now it's your turn to carry on. Take what's left of our family's name and make it mean something good again." "Grandpa." He opened his eyes one more time and looked at me with perfect clarity. "I love you, Clara. Make your grandmother proud." Those were his last words. His heart stopped 20 minutes later, despite everything the doctors tried. I was holding his hand when he died. And I felt the exact moment his spirit left. It was like a light going out, leaving only the shell behind. The funeral was small. My father wasn't allowed to attend because he was under house arrest. Catherine was in jail, awaiting trial. My mother and I stood together in the rain again, just like we had stood at my grandmother's funeral. But this time, the grief felt different. It was mixed with pride and determination. The trial began 2 months later. Dominic Rossi prosecuted the case himself, having been appointed as a special prosecutor given my grandfather's involvement. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding my father guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Catherine got 12 years for her role in the scheme. But the real justice came after the sentencing. Every penny of the stolen money was recovered from accounts my father had hidden in offshore banks and in investments Catherine had made. The court ordered full restitution to the Golden Years Foundation, plus penalties and interest. The total came to nearly $6 million. Standing in the courtroom as the judge read the verdict, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. My grandfather had been right. Some debts could only be paid in court. A year after my grandfather's death, I stood in front of a gleaming new building in downtown Philadelphia. The sign above the door read Eleanor Vance Memorial Fund for Senior Care. The foundation had been established with the recovered money and additional donations that had poured in once the story became public. People across the country had been moved by my grandmother's story and my grandfather's sacrifice. I had graduated from law school the previous month, finishing my degree in record time. I was now the executive director of the foundation, working alongside a board that included James Henderson, the man who had stood with my grandfather at that first press conference. Mr. Henderson had become something of a surrogate grandfather to me, sharing stories about his wife Margaret and my grandmother, who had been friends during their time at Meadowbrook. The foundation now funded improvements at 6 different nursing homes, ensuring proper staffing, modern equipment, and dignity for every resident. We had also established a watchdog program to audit charitable organizations and help prevent the kind of theft my father had perpetrated. On the day of our grand opening, as I stood at the podium preparing to speak to the crowd of donors and media, I received a letter. It had been forwarded from my mother's house. The return address was a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. The letter was from my father. His handwriting was shaky, not at all like the bold script I remembered. "Clara," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know that I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I finally see what your grandfather was trying to teach me my whole life. I spent my entire life trying to beat him, trying to prove I was smarter, richer, more successful. But in the end, the person who ended up being most like him was you. You chose truth over comfort. You chose justice over family loyalty. You chose to build something good from the ashes of what I destroyed. Your grandfather was right. You are the hope of this family, and your grandmother would be so proud of who you've become. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that seeing you succeed, seeing you carry on the values I rejected, has given me the first real peace I've felt in years. Keep doing what you're doing. Be the person I could never be. That's the only redemption I'll ever have. Your father, Ethan." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I didn't know how I felt about it yet. Maybe someday I would be ready to respond. Maybe not. But that was a decision for another day. I looked out at the audience waiting for my speech. I saw Mr. Henderson in the front row smiling encouragement. I saw former residents of the nursing homes we had helped their families beside them. I saw my mother, who had rebuilt her own life and now volunteered for the foundation 3 days a week. I saw Dominic Rossi, who had become a mentor and friend. And in my mind, I saw my grandparents standing together the way they always had, proud and strong. I stepped up to the microphone and began to speak. My grandmother, Eleanor Vance, believed that every person deserves dignity, compassion, and care, especially in their final years. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, believed that justice must be served no matter the personal cost. Today we honor both of them by opening this foundation that will ensure their values live on long after we're gone. This building stands as proof that from the deepest betrayal can come the strongest renewal. From the darkest secrets can come the brightest truth. And from the ashes of one family's shame can rise a legacy of hope and healing. The audience applauded, but I wasn't finished. My grandfather taught me that real courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified of the consequences. It's about standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, even when it means standing against your own family. Today I challenge all of you to think about the legacies you're building. What will people say about you when you're gone? Will they remember your wealth, your status, your comfort? Or will they remember your integrity, your compassion, your willingness to fight for what's right? I paused, looking up at the sky. It was a perfect blue, not a cloud in sight. My grandparents are gone, but their legacy lives on in this building, in the lives we will save, in the dignity we will restore to those who have been forgotten. And that legacy will continue through each of you who choose to stand up, speak out, and demand better from yourselves and your community. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for believing that justice and mercy can coexist. Thank you for proving that good can triumph over evil, even when evil wears a familiar face. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped away from the podium, I touched the locket around my neck. Inside was a photo of my grandparents on their wedding day, young and full of hope. I whispered to them, "I did it. I kept my promise. And I'll keep fighting for what you believed in for the rest of my life." The sun felt warm on my face as I greeted the guests. shook hands, and listened to stories about people's loved ones who needed care. This was my life now. This was my purpose. Not trying to hide family secrets or maintain false appearances, but building something real and lasting and good. As the event wound down and people began to leave, Mr. Henderson approached me. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you today, Clara, and I know my Margaret is smiling down on all of us. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, for everything you did to support him, for standing up when it mattered most." He patted my hand gently. "We all have a choice when we discover wrongdoing, especially in our own families. We can look away, make excuses, protect the people we love, even when they don't deserve it. Or we can stand up and demand better. Your grandfather made the hard choice. You made the hard choice. And because of that, hundreds of people will receive better care and justice was served. That's what legacy really means." I watched him walk away and I thought about those words. Legacy. What kind of legacy did I want to leave? I was only 25 years old, but I already knew the answer. I wanted to be remembered the way my grandparents would be remembered, as people who chose right over easy justice, over comfort, truth over lies. The Eleanor Vance Memorial Fund grew over the following years. We expanded to 12 states, helping thousands of seniors receive the care they deserved. I testified before Congress about elder abuse and the need for stronger oversight of charitable organizations. I wrote articles and gave speeches about the importance of financial transparency in nonprofits. And every day I worked to honor the sacrifice my grandfather had made and the values my grandmother had instilled in me. My father and Catherine remained in prison. My mother eventually remarried to a kind man who had no interest in money or status, just in being a good person. I dated occasionally but focused primarily on my work. There would be time for romance later. Right now, I had a mission. On the 5th anniversary of my grandfather's death, I visited his grave. I brought flowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone he shared with my grandmother. "I'm still keeping my promise," I told them. "The foundation is stronger than ever. We just opened our first training program to teach other organizations how to prevent fraud. And Grandpa, you'll be happy to know that the case you built has become a landmark. It's now used in law schools to teach ethics and prosecutorial responsibility." The wind rustled through the trees, and I could almost hear my grandmother's laugh, warm and full of life. I could almost see my grandfather's smile, rare but genuine. They were gone, but they had left me with the greatest gift anyone could give: the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what happened. They want to know if I wish I had never found that USB drive, never learned the truth about my father. They ask if family loyalty should have mattered more than abstract principles of justice. My answer is always the same. I regret that my father made the choices he did. I regret that my grandmother died carrying the weight of his sins. I regret that my grandfather had to spend his final years prosecuting his own son. But I don't regret seeking the truth. I don't regret standing with my grandfather. Because if I had looked away, if I had chosen the easy path of denial and family loyalty over justice, I would have betrayed everything my grandparents stood for. And I would have betrayed all those elderly people who suffered because of my father's greed. There's a photo on my desk at the foundation office. It shows my grandmother in her volunteer uniform, surrounded by residents at Meadowbrook Senior Care. She's smiling that radiant smile of hers, and you can see the love and respect in the faces of the people around her. Next to it is a photo of my grandfather in his judge's robes, taken on the day he was sworn into the federal bench. His expression is serious, dignified, full of determination to serve justice faithfully. Between these two photos, I placed a recent picture from our foundation's 5th anniversary celebration. I'm standing with a group of nursing home residents we've helped, and Mr. Henderson is beside me. We're all smiling, and behind us is the banner that reads, "Dignity, Compassion, Justice." That's what my grandparents gave me. That's what they gave the world. And that's what I'm committed to giving forward for the rest of my life. My father will be eligible for parole in another 8 years. I don't know if I'll go see him when that time comes. Part of me wants to believe that people can change, that redemption is possible, even for those who have committed terrible wrongs. My grandmother believed that. But my grandfather also taught me that redemption has to be earned through genuine remorse and concrete action, not just words. Maybe my father will emerge from prison a changed man. Maybe he'll spend the rest of his life trying to make amends in whatever small ways he can. Or maybe he'll remain the same person he always was, angry and unrepentant, blaming everyone but himself for his choices. Either way, that's his journey to make. Mine is different. I choose to build rather than destroy. I choose to heal rather than harm. I choose to honor the best of my family's legacy while refusing to perpetuate the worst. Every day I wake up knowing that my work matters, that I'm making a real difference in people's lives. And every night I go to sleep knowing that I've lived with integrity just as my grandparents taught me. The Eleanor Vance Memorial Fund isn't just about providing care for the elderly. It's about proving that one person's courage can change the world. It's about showing that justice delayed is not justice denied. It's about demonstrating that families can heal from even the deepest betrayals if someone is willing to stand up and say, "This ends now. We're going to do better." My grandfather used to say that the law is only as strong as the people who enforce it. But I've learned something else through all of this. Families are only as strong as the values they uphold. Money can be lost, reputations can be rebuilt, but integrity once compromised is almost impossible to recover. My father learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it by watching him fall and choosing a different path. So if you're listening to this story and wondering what you would do if you discovered a terrible secret about someone you love, I'll tell you this. The truth is always better than a comfortable lie. Justice is always worth pursuing even when it tears your world apart. And standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything is the only way to build a legacy worth leaving behind. My grandparents gave me the courage to face the hardest truth of my life. They gave me the strength to choose justice over family loyalty. They gave me the wisdom to understand that real love sometimes means holding people accountable for their actions. And they gave me the hope that from the darkest betrayal can come the brightest renewal. I am Clara Vance, granddaughter of Eleanor and Arthur Vance, and I am living proof that integrity is not weakness, that justice is not vengeance, and that one person's choice to do the right thing can change countless lives for the better. This is my legacy, this is my promise, and this is my truth. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? What would you do if you found yourself in my shoes, holding evidence that could destroy your family, but also bring justice to innocent victims? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's facing an impossible choice right now. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about your own values and the legacy you want to leave behind, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that courage is possible, that justice is worth fighting for, and that doing the right thing, even when it's the hardest thing, is always worth it in the end. Thank you for listening, and remember, the legacy you leave behind starts with the choices you make today.